Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 270, Tie 1 On. The episode begins with Ash and the gang watching in the stands as the next battle of Group H was commencing, being Macy against Vincent from The Legend of Thunder, as Macy was introduced as the competitor who had just lost to Ash. Man, that's humiliating. And Vincent was introduced as being from Newbark Town. Ash and the gang were somewhat concerned that Macy could potentially lose, since that would mean that she would be out entirely of the tournament. Macy tried not to be intimidated by this, though, as she was ready for the battle to begin, while Vincent, on the other hand, was not, as he had entered the stadium in a cape, showing off some dance moves as he greeted the camera people who were filming the battle for TV, as he went up to the camera and said hello to Jimmy and Marina, hoping that they were watching the battle. Now, if they were, who fucking knows, because we didn't get to see them. Although the show was generous enough to give us this from The Legend of Thunder, they weren't going to show us the two actual main characters. Ash was initially embarrassed on behalf of Vincent, but when he saw the battle begin between Vincent and Macy, Ash got rid of his embarrassment, now viewing Vincent as a very strong trainer, making Ash excited because he knew he was going to be battling Vincent in the next battle, since he had already battled Macy. Ash got even more impressed as he saw Vincent able to take out Macy's Starmie with his Golduck, implying that Vincent had caught a Golduck, but he'd also caught more Pokemon, as he then sent out his Quagsire after Macy had sent out her new Macargo to be Golduck. So now it was 1-1, and it was Macargo versus Quagsire, and this battle ended in a draw, with Macargo and Quagsire both fainting, meaning that Vincent was down to his last Pokemon, as was Macy, as Macy sent out her Quilava, and Vincent sent out his Poliwhirl. Macy starts off by having her Quilava use Flamethrower, as Vincent quickly takes action and has his Poliwhirl countered with a Water Gun. However, while Vincent was ordering Poliwhirl to use Water Gun, he got so fired up as he was flexing his cape and trying to flex his muscles while doing so that he ended up tripping, not being able to get off the Water Gun order, leaving Poliwhirl just standing there not knowing what to do, as it seemingly hadn't been ordered to do anything, as the Flamethrower severely injures it, knocking it against the wall. Quilava then went in for a second Flamethrower, and Poliwhirl tried to dodge this one, but it couldn't move, as it appeared that Starmie had used Thunder Wave before it fainted and spread an electric current throughout the field, which was affecting Poliwhirl, meaning that it couldn't move, also meaning that Poliwhirl got massively hit by the second Flamethrower, and Poliwhirl was knocked out, giving Macy the win. So, Ash now had 3 points, and Macy had 3 points. Misty and Brock yelled from the stands, congratulating her, but Ash teased her by stating that she wasn't that skilled, as if she was, then she would have got 2 victories in a row, instead of losing to him. Ash and the gang then watched as Macy's 3 points appeared on the Group H monitor screen, with Brock confirming the fact that Ash and Macy were now tied, so Macy had saved herself from elimination by winning, and stated that Ash would now only need a tie against Vincent in order to advance, since Ash needed 4 total points to win. Ash was confident he could do so, but Brock reminded him of the possibility that Vincent could win against Ash, and therefore Vincent, Macy, and Ash would all be tied with 3 points, which would also mean that a second tiebreaker round robin would be needed, so they would have to redo the entire Group H battles all over again. Ash was aware of this now, and declared that losing would not be an option, since he didn't want to have to redo the tournament. Back in the Athletes' Village, Ash and the gang had now arrived at the Pokemon Center again, and while they went inside, Ash decided to send out his Bulbasaur and Squirtle, and have them rekindle their old friendship outside. As Ash and the gang walked into the center, just as Ash anticipated, Bulbasaur and Squirtle instantly began getting along like they had never left each other, very happy to see each other after all this time, as they played together. They were beginning to play a little rough with each other, just as little kids would do, so Ash told them to be good and play nicely, informing them that he had a very important job to do inside the Pokemon Center, involving using the computer in his hotel room in the Pokemon Center to study up on Vincent to learn how to beat him. Okay, I'm gonna be honest here, I just had a bad recording where I accidentally called Vincent Jackson, and that's because sometimes the dub refers to him as Vincent, and sometimes as Jackson. It's fucking weird, but I'm gonna just try and go with only Jackson. See, I just did it again. I'm gonna try and go with only Vincent, and if I mess up and accidentally say Jackson, just know that I'm referring to Vincent. Alright, anyways. Upon leaving Bulbasaur and Squirtle to themselves, inside the Pokemon Center, the first thing Ash and the gang saw was Vincent talking with Professor Elm on a nearby computer, initially being drawn to the computer by Vincent and Elm's familiar voices. Ash decides to interrupt Vincent and Elm's conversation, wondering how the two knew each other, as Vincent was startled by Ash and the gang approaching him, but he got excited as he recognized Ash as the person he was supposed to battle next, and shook Ash's hand, as the two of them officially introduced each other. Elm then saw Ash through the computer screne, and of course recognized him as well, and greets him. Ash then finally asks the question he wanted to, being how Vincent knew Professor Elm, leading Vincent to explain that since he was from Elm's hometown of Newbark Town, this meant that he was able to get a starter Pokemon from Professor Elm as his first Pokemon, which was his Chikorita, adding that that's how he met Elm, was when he first went to go get his Chikorita. Ash questioned where his Chikorita was, not seeing it obviously, leading Vincent to remind Ash that Meganium evolved from Chikorita, and he had a Meganium. Ash appeared shocked by this, leading both Vincent and Elm to come to the conclusion that Ash was shocked that Vincent's Chikorita had evolved into Meganium, with Vincent stating that it had because he had given it a lot of training since the day he first got it, since he left on his journey immediately after getting Chikorita, and Elm admitted that he was surprised to see that Meganium had evolved from Chikorita as well, adding that it had only evolved relatively recently, and his belief that Vincent was just going to keep Chikorita a Chikorita all of its life. This led Vincent to admit that although he did want to evolve his Chikorita, he was partially inspired by Chikorita wanting to evolve itself, so he wanted to honor its wishes, so he helped it evolve by giving it as much experience as possible. Hearing that Meganium had a lot of experience and was a good battler, Ash questioned why Vincent didn't use it when he was battling Macy, since it was super strong. This led Vincent to state that Meganium being strong was precisely the reason why he didn't use it, stating that he wanted to keep it as a secret weapon until he made it to the top 16 so that he could catch the tougher opponents off guard, although he admitted that this was likely a foolish decision, since he of course lost against Macy, and this loss could have potentially been avoided with the power of his Meganium. Vincent then directs his attention solely back to Elm as he questions how his parents were doing, admitting that he hadn't talked to them in quite some time, leading Elm to state that his parents were doing absolutely fine in New Barktown and always sent messages to Elm to tell Vincent that they loved him if he ever came in contact with him. Elm then asked Vincent how Jimmy and Marina, his two friends from the Legend of Thunder, were doing, leading Vincent to admit that he had only talked to Marina recently and knew that she was doing okay, but he hadn't talked to Jimmy in quite a while. Elm then congratulated both Vincent and Ash on making it to the preliminary battles of the Johto League, with Elm telling Vincent that he was following in Marina and Jimmy's footsteps, revealing that they had entered a tournament as well, though not the Silver Conference, obviously, leading Vincent to become disappointed that Jimmy and Marina were above him yet again, as he tried to hide his disappointment, stating, "Slow and steady wins the race," indicating that just because he was the last one to enter the tournament, that didn't matter, as the tournament that he entered was bigger and more popular. Laughing uncomfortably as he said this, doubting himself. Meanwhile, back outside with Squirtle and Bulbasaur, while they were relaxing and taking a walk, they both spotted an apple on a tree, and Bulbasaur instantly tried to grab it with his Vine Whip, as Squirtle had requested him to, wanting a piece of the apple as well. Right as Bulbasaur's Vine Whip got up there, though, Meganium, Vincent's, arrived and wanted to get the apple as well, as it used Vine Whip itself, with Meganium also being accompanied by Vincent's Azumarill. This causes a huge tug-of-war to happen, as both Bulbasaur and Meganium were using their Vine Whip to try and pull the apple out of the tree, and this caused the apple to split in half due to too much force exerted on it, with one part ending up in Bulbasaur's vine and the other part ending up in Meganium's vine. However, Meganium dropped its part, allowing Bulbasaur to retrieve that one as well, and give them both to Squirtle, as Squirtle proceeds to share one of the halves of the apple with Bulbasaur. Before Bulbasaur or Squirtle could chow down, though, Meganium took Bulbasaur's half and gave it to the Azumarill, revealing that just like how Squirtle had initially requested Bulbasaur to get the apple down, Azumarill must have requested Meganium to get the apple down for it. Squirtle was angry on behalf of Bulbasaur for getting its piece of apple stolen, and Meganium and Azumarill saw that Squirtle was easily pissed off and wanted to try and tease it a little bit more, as Azumarill threw its piece of apple towards Squirtle, hitting it in the face and knocking Squirtle's half of the apple out of its hand. Of course, making Squirtle even more angry, as Meganium and Azumarill laughed at Squirtle's anger and misfortune, immensely enjoying it. Squirtle got so angry that it decided to challenge Meganium and Azumarill to a fight to get its revenge, putting on its classic Squirtle Squad glasses to remind itself of its evil past, as it needed to unleash the evil to get enough power to take out Azumarill and Meganium, stating that he would make them learn the tough way not to mess with his goddamn apple. However, much like how Bulbasaur was the peacekeeper at Professor Oak's lab, Bulbasaur maintained his peacekeeper job as he restrained Squirtle with his Vine Whip to stop Squirtle from attacking, since he didn't want the fight to escalate, even though Bulbasaur was initially the one that had its half of the apple stolen, showing how mature Bulbasaur seemed to be. Bulbasaur then tried to apologize for Squirtle's behavior to the Azumarill, hoping that it would make the Azumarill apologize as well, but Azumarill simply laughed some more as it slapped Bulbasaur in the face, which just made Squirtle even angrier. However, Bulbasaur wasn't fazed, as he just shook off the slap and tried once again to convince the Azumarill that Squirtle was sorry, and tried his best to continue to restrain Squirtle from attacking. Seeing that Meganium and Azumarill weren't saying anything to them, or doing anything to them, Bulbasaur thought that maybe its peacekeeping tactics had worked, as he told Squirtle to come with him, as the two of them began to walk away. However, Meganium and Azumarill just laughed, as now that they had caught Bulbasaur and Squirtle off guard, Meganium could just attack them again, as it used a Vine Whip on Bulbasaur, tripping it. Man, why is Meganium such a cunt? It was never this much of a cunt during the Legend of Thunder. Anyways, Meganium and Azumarill just further proved that they were cunts, as they began to laugh at Bulbasaur for tripping, which, to no one's surprise, made Squirtle angry, but it had actually made Bulbasaur angry as well, despite being the peacekeeper. So, with that, Bulbasaur didn't stop Squirtle from attacking Azumarill and Meganium, as it joined in as well, with Azumarill and Meganium attacking them back. Bulbasaur was able to get a big hit in on Azumarill with its own Vine Whip, as Squirtle got ready to attack Meganium, but Meganium used its Vine Whip to grab Squirtle's leg and trip him, just like he did Bulbasaur, causing Meganium and Azumarill to laugh again on how Squirtle had fallen for the same trick that Bulbasaur did. This just made Bulbasaur and Squirtle even fucking angrier, as they began to do like wrestling moves and shit on Azumarill and Meganium. It truly was a fucking super chaotic fight at this point. While this was going on, Ash and the gang and Vincent were still in the Pokemon Center talking to Elm, as Ash had taken over the main talking spot to talk to Elm, realizing that he hadn't updated him on Larvitar, and confirmed to him that Ash and the gang had successfully delivered Larvitar to the Pokemon Preserve, and it was now living happily with its mother, Tyranitar. Elm confirmed that he already knew this, reminding Ash that he was related to the Preservation Council, so they had told him what had happened. Ash and the gang and Vincent are then forced to end the call with Elm, as they hear several grunts that sounded as if they were coming from Pokemon fighting, and rush to the window of the center, looking out of it, only to see that Meganium and Azumarill were fighting Bulbasaur and Squirtle. Also out the window, they saw that some of the noise was actually being caused by humans, as a whole bunch of people had crowded around the fighting Pokemon to observe them. And just then, one of the people in the crowd runs up into the Pokemon Center to inform Ash and Vincent, as well as Brock and Misty, what was going on outside, advising that they should come and watch it, stating it was an epic battle, not knowing that these Pokemon actually belonged to Vincent and Ash. As Ash and the gang and Vincent rushed out of the Pokemon Center to try and stop the fight, Ash and Vincent both had momentary thoughts on if these Pokemon were even theirs, or if they were actually another trainer's, since they both knew that their Pokemon weren't known to fight like this. Yeah, no shit, like I said, Meganium was never this fucking rude during the Legend of Thunder specials. Unfortunately, Ash was able to identify the Bulbasaur and Squirtle as his when he saw his Squirtle wearing his signature Squirtle Squad glasses. This made Vincent believe that the Meganium and Azumarill were his as well, so without further ado, Ash and the gang and Vincent rushed outside the Pokemon Center, yelling at their Pokemon to stop fighting and to quiet down, because they were drawing an obnoxious crowd. However, Ash and the gang's and Vincent's attempts at quelling the fight were useless, as Squirtle and Azumarill were still wrestling, as were Meganium and Bulbasaur, putting their heads up against one another. Fortunately, the fighting did eventually cease, as none other than Harrison showed up, sending out his Miltank, revealing that he had one, as he had his Miltank use Heal Bell, which had the ability to calm down Pokemon from their angered state, and make the Pokemon stop fighting, as they suddenly became friends. Apparently, the fighting pairs became the closest friends, with Azumarill and Squirtle becoming close, and Bulbasaur and Meganium becoming close. However, since this was likely just an effect of the Heal Bell, which would soon wear off, we would see if their friendships would wear off as well. Vincent and Ash thank Harrison for his help quelling the fight, when just then, Ash and the gang could hear police sirens in the distance, as it was Officer Jenny's motorcycle, as she showed up, explaining that she had got a report from some nearby Pokemon trainers who were observing the fight of how dangerous the fight was, so she came to investigate it. And also states that if any trainer's Pokemon were caught fighting outside of the actual stadium, that could get the trainers disqualified, since it wasn't considered safe for the Pokemon to fight in an uncontrolled environment at a civilized place like the League, and warns them to be careful, stating that there was more than just the punishment of potentially getting disqualified. You could also end up losing the points that you've earned in your group as well. This led Harrison to stick up for Ash and Vincent, saying that the 4 Pokemon were only practicing against each other to warm up for Ash and Vincent's upcoming battle. Jenny believes Harrison's lie and apologizes to Ash and Vincent for being so harsh towards them, explaining that she shouldn't have warned them of the consequences before learning of the whole situation. Suddenly, Gary arrives and decides to do a little trolling with Ash by acting like his old self, as he tries to get Ash and Vincent in trouble again, stating that the Pokemon were actually fighting because of an argument, not because of practice. Knowing this because he saw the whole thing. Jenny now gets suspicious of both Ash, Vincent, and Gary, wondering who was telling the truth. So this leads Gary to stop his trolling, because he didn't actually want Ash to be disqualified, he just wanted to mess with him. So he states that he just remembered that they were sparring, not fighting in an argument after all. Officer Jenny was obviously confused by Gary's sudden change in claim, but she decided to believe him, as she simply drove off, not wanting to deal with this bullshit anymore. With Officer Jenny gone, Ash thanked Gary for sticking up for him and Vincent, although he had a bit of a sarcastic tone, because he obviously would have preferred Gary to just help him from the get-go, instead of being a dick at the beginning, leading Gary to seemingly return to his old self yet again, as he claimed that the only reason why he had assisted Ash was because he wanted to be the one to crush him, and he obviously couldn't crush him in the tournament if he was disqualified, and stated that if Ash's Pokemon did fight and not listen to Ash when he told them to calm down, then Ash truly was an amateur trainer, and would not make it past the next round, let alone make it to the finals, calling Ash an amateur trainer. Ash was mad that Gary had essentially took pity on him just so that he could have the chance to crush him himself, and stated confidently that he was no amateur and would make it to the finals, although Gary obviously rebutted against this, claiming that he would make it to the finals instead. Misty was getting annoyed by Ash and Gary's bickering, and tried to break up the arguing, but it was no use, as the two continued to argue about who would make it to the finals. Eventually, Gary seemingly gets annoyed with the bickering as well, as he decides to take his exit. As for Harrison's reaction to all this, he was annoyed by the arguing, and questioned how Ash and Gary knew each other, asking if they were longtime rivals, which Ash confirmed, as well as Gary, as he shouted at Harrison while still walking away. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were currently hiding in some bushes, not spying on Ash and the gang, but plotting how they were going to increase their profit by selling more fake badges, leading Jesse and Meowth to obviously request James to paint more bottle caps. However, James reveals that even though he would like to do this, he didn't have any inspiration at the moment, and couldn't think of any designs to draw on the bottle caps. Eventually, night arrived, and James still hadn't thought of anything to draw, so this led Jesse and Meowth to go searching around Silvertown, and they eventually found a trainer who had all of his 8 badges on display on his belt, and Jesse and Meowth memorized the designs, and then they went back to James and told them to him so he could begin making the fake badges by drawing on the bottle caps, and then Jesse and Meowth could sell them. Triple profit, here they came. Later that night, Ash and the gang, now with Ash fully remembering that he should do this, even without Brock's reminder, decided to analyze Vincent's battle data in the database on Ash's computer in the hotel room, and they see that Vincent had a shiny Magneton as his last Pokemon that he hadn't unveiled yet. Ash was obviously surprised to see a shiny, but Brock simply told him that since Vincent liked to have Pokemon used as a surprise, he would likely use the 3 Pokemon he didn't use in his previous battle in this one. That being his shiny Magneton, his Azumarill, and his strong as fuck Meganium. So this led Ash to come up with a strategy of using Cyndaquil to counter Meganium, thanks to Misty's suggestion. And Ash also agreed with Brock's assumption that Vincent would use Azumarill, since he and Azumarill seemed relatively close to each other, so with that, he decided to send in Pikachu as his second Pokemon, so he could have the type advantage against it. Ash wasn't sure, at least not as sure as Brock, that Vincent would end up using his shiny Magneton though, so he wondered which Pokemon he should use as his third. He realizes that there was no way to truly find out, so he decides to just pick a third Pokemon at random, hoping that Vincent would use his Magneton. Brock was initially against this idea, but he couldn't think of who Vincent was going to use either, so he let Ash go with this, as the next day, Vincent and Ash stood on the opposite ends of the Silver Stadium, and the battle began, with the computer randomly deciding that Vincent was supposed to send out his Pokemon first, and make the first move once both Pokemon were sent out. So, with that, Vincent decided to send out his Azumarill. Ash was excited that his and Brock's prediction was right, as he sent out his Pikachu. Vincent then made the first move, although not before going up to the camera people yet again and saying hi to his mom this time. He then ordered Azumarill to use Water Gun, leading Ash to order Pikachu to use Quick Attack to run past the Water Gun and dodge it. However, Azumarill simply fired another Water Gun, knocking Pikachu back a little bit. However, this seemed to be just what Pikachu wanted, as it used the momentum from being knocked back to charge up its Quick Attack once again and go in for an attack on Azumarill with it this time. Unfortunately though, Azumarill jumped out of the way, dodging, leading Pikachu to try a Thunderbolt next, but Azumarill manages to counter the Thunderbolt with a Bubble Beam, making both attacks collide and both attacks end up being destroyed. Azumarill then hits Pikachu with an Icy Wind, and not only does this harm Pikachu physically, since the wind was so strong, Pikachu was getting blown back, so it couldn't go in for any counter, allowing Azumarill to use Iron Tail to hit Pikachu, and almost knock him over. However, Pikachu manages to grab the tail right after it hits, and as Azumarill tries to go in for another Iron Tail, Pikachu jumps on Azumarill's tail to stop it from using it, and then hits Azumarill with a Thunder, with Azumarill unable to do any attacks back, which ends up knocking Azumarill out, as it collapses and Pikachu jumps off its tail, leading the referee to declare that the score was now 1-0 with Ash in the lead, and Misty and Brock to congratulate Ash on taking the lead. Vincent then recalled his Azumarill and sent out, just as Brock had predicted, his Magneton. Of course, due to it being shiny, Vincent immediately bragged about this, though didn't reveal how he had acquired a shiny, but since Ash already knew that it was shiny, he wasn't surprised at all, and simply got excited because he figured that his Pikachu, despite being an electric type as well, was way stronger than a Magneton, so Pikachu could easily win. The battle then began with Pikachu using a Thunderbolt on Magneton, and although it hits, Magneton just uses Thunderbolt as well, which hits Pikachu. It and Magneton then continue to fire Thunderbolts at each other, but they don't end up doing much damage due to them both being electric types, so Pikachu decides to change tactics, catching the Magneton off guard as it goes for a quick attack, but the shiny Magneton saw it coming and dodged, and used Thunder Wave to paralyze Pikachu, preventing it from moving, allowing Magneton to strike with a Tri-Attack, which launches Pikachu right into the stadium wall and knocks it out, leading the referee to declare that the score was now tied. Ash runs up to Pikachu and comforts him, as Misty and Brock were surprised with Pikachu's failure, and Brock came to the conclusion that Magneton could have perhaps been stronger than a normal Magneton because it was a shiny. Yeah, I don't know about that one, but I guess we'll see. Anyways, Ash decided to hand over Pikachu to Brock after he congratulated it on doing a good job, as he then decided to send out his Cyndaquil as his second Pokemon, which Brock and Misty thought was a good choice because Cyndaquil's fire would be good against Magneton's steel. Magneton made the first move by going for a Thunderbolt, but Cyndaquil was able to jump out of the way and dodge, as it used a Flamethrower, although Magneton was able to dodge this, and then went for a Thunder Wave to paralyze Cyndaquil to stop it from moving. However, Cyndaquil managed to use a Smoke Screen, which actually made Cyndaquil be able to hide in the smoke, so Magneton was unable to find Cyndaquil, so he couldn't land the Thunder Wave, or it couldn't land a Thunderbolt. With Magneton off guard, Cyndaquil then jumped out of the smoke and used a Swift on it. The smoke then disappeared, as Cyndaquil decided to use a Flamethrower, hoping that Magneton would still be off guard, but since Magneton could now see Cyndaquil again, it managed to use Double Team to create multiple copies of itself, so that the main Magneton could dodge the Flamethrower, with the Flamethrower only hitting the duplicates. Just then, all the remaining Magneton duplicates then surrounded Cyndaquil, trapping it, as Ash tried to order Cyndaquil to use another Flamethrower to destroy the duplicates and find the real Magneton again, but before Cyndaquil could do this, the Magneton fired off a Thunder Wave, paralyzing Cyndaquil immensely. Cyndaquil tried to shake the Thunder Wave off, but he couldn't, as Magneton finished off the battle with a Tri-Attack, knocking Cyndaquil out. Ash then recalled Cyndaquil as the crowd cheered for Vincent, and Vincent hugged his Magneton, congratulating it on the win. Brock then reminded Ash that he was now at his last Pokemon, which the referee officially declared, and he hoped that Ash made a wise decision and picked a Pokemon to counter Magneton, like Brock had initially suggested, although Brock didn't know for sure, because Ash had decided to keep it a surprise, just as Jackson kept his Meganium a surprise. And Brock soon found out what Ash's final Pokemon was, as he sent it out, being his Bulbasaur, as Ash praised that Bulbasaur could win, knowing that it was his last option, and that if Bulbasaur lost to Magneton, then Vincent would win the battle, meaning that the Group H battles would have to be done all over again. And even if Bulbasaur was able to beat Magneton, he still had to get through, likely, Vincent's strongest Pokemon, Meganium, so Ash wasn't super excited either way, but he knew that he would have to battle regardless. Before he could attack though, Magneton started off with a Thunderbolt, but thankfully Bulbasaur was able to dodge and use Razor Leaf to hit Magneton. Bulbasaur tried to fire more Razor Leafs out, but Magneton was prepared this time, as it used a double team to dodge and then surround Bulbasaur. However, Bulbasaur was able to stop all the Magneton duplicates from using both Thunder Wave and Tri-Attack in the same way that they had used it against Pikachu and Cyndaquil, being in succession immediately after each other, by using Vine Whip to spin his vines around in the circle formation that the Magneton were in, which resulted in all of the duplicates being destroyed, and also the real Magneton being hit and knocked down. Magneton got back up though, and simply tried the Thunder Wave and Tri-Attack combination again, as it used Thunder Wave first, but that was blocked by a Razor Leaf, and when Vincent ordered his Magneton to use Tri-Attack, Bulbasaur used Vine Whip to jump in the air and avoid the Tri-Attack, and with Bulbasaur then in the air, it fired a Leech Seed from its bulb from up above, which hit Magneton and began draining it of its energy. Magneton eventually loses so much energy that it falls to the ground, and Ash saw that Magneton had almost fainted, so he told Bulbasaur to use Vine Whip to grab and spin Magneton around, and with Magneton thrown around, it gets thrown onto the ground at a high speed, which knocks Magneton out, leading the referee to declare that the score was now even, and both trainers were down to their last Pokemon. So, Vincent sent out his secret weapon, Meganium, calling back his Magneton. Before Bulbasaur and Meganium began battling, they first engaged in a heavy glaring contest, both still immensely angry at each other because of the fight that had occurred yesterday. Bulbasaur decided to take out its anger first, as it used Razor Leaf, but Meganium simply countered with its own Razor Leaf, which happened to be stronger, destroying Bulbasaur's leaves and hitting Bulbasaur. This led Bulbasaur to try a Vine Whip instead, but Meganium just ended up using its own Vine Whip, which immediately stopped Bulbasaur from grabbing Meganium and slamming it to the ground, as Meganium instead did this to Bulbasaur, since Meganium was heavier, so it had an easier time lifting up Bulbasaur, as opposed to Bulbasaur lifting up it. Leading Vincent to remark how all of its Meganium's moves were outmatching Bulbasaur's moves, stating that Meganium was stronger. He then ordered Meganium to go for an attack that Bulbasaur couldn't do, which was Body Slam, which Meganium was happy to do because it remembered the physical fight from earlier and thought that this would be just like the wrestling they had done. However, Bulbasaur was too fast and managed to dodge the Body Slam, leading Meganium to keep trying, but Bulbasaur dodged every time. And since Meganium was so distracted by wanting to land its Body Slam, this allowed Bulbasaur to actually hit Meganium with a Razor Leaf. But Meganium then finally changed its tactic, as it went in for a Vine Whip. However, Bulbasaur used its own Vine Whip to jump and avoid Meganium's, and then uses his Vine Whip, since his vines were currently out, to grab Meganium's neck, frustrating Vincent. As Bulbasaur then detached Meganium from its vines, since it threw it up into the sky, hoping that Meganium would land on the ground and knock itself out. However, Meganium flipped around in the air and used a Razor Leaf on Bulbasaur, hitting it, which leads Bulbasaur to try and get control of the fight again, as it tries to grab Meganium with its Vine Whip again, but Meganium uses this to its advantage, as since Bulbasaur was pulling it down with its Vine Whip, it was able to try and use Body Slam to land on Bulbasaur. The weight of this incoming Body Slam, forcing Bulbasaur to jump out of the way and let go of Meganium, letting Meganium use another Razor Leaf on Bulbasaur, since Bulbasaur finally wasn't holding onto it anymore. After getting hit with the Razor Leaf though, Bulbasaur quickly changed this, as it grabbed on to Meganium's neck again to prevent it from moving far, since it was on the ground, and then proceeded to hit it with multiple Razor Leaves. Although this severely injured Meganium, knocking it to the ground, since Bulbasaur was hanging on to Meganium, this forced Bulbasaur down as well, and also forced it to release its Vine Whip. Soon, Bulbasaur and Meganium both were able to get back up, essentially bringing the battle back to square one, as they both tried to weaken each other by smacking each other's faces with Vine Whip repeatedly, leading Misty to question why neither Bulbasaur or Meganium were trying to dodge any of the Vine Whips, leading Brock to explain that it may be because Bulbasaur and Meganium both had an immense pride, and they wanted to see who was truly stronger without dodging at this point, being willing to have themselves knocked out as long as they could settle their rivalry. Just as the two Vine Whips hit each other again, Bulbasaur and Meganium are both knocked down to the ground, leading Brock to realize that Bulbasaur and Meganium were both about to faint. However, they both managed to get up out of pure want to win, as Vincent and Ash both command their Pokemon to use a different attack on each other, being a Solar Beam, and when both Solar Beams collide, it causes a huge explosion. However, when the smoke from the explosion cleared, both Bulbasaur and Meganium were still standing, even after the explosion, which Ash and Vincent expected, knowing that their Pokemon were strong, but Misty and Brock were surprised. Despite still standing, though, Bulbasaur and Meganium had only done this to prove to each other that they were equally strong and that they could both survive the other's strongest attack. So, Bulbasaur and Meganium were happy that they had settled their rivalry by proving that they were equal, as they both decided to relax, fainting, not wanting to battle anymore, meaning that the battle was a draw, which the referee officially declared, much to everyone's shock. Both Ash and Vincent then thank their Pokemon for putting up an awesome fight, as Ash recalls Bulbasaur and Vincent recalls his Meganium, with Ash thanking Bulbasaur from inside his Pokeball, since now Ash could advance to the top 16, since he had 4 points, which the referee officially declared, stating that Ash had now won Group H, meaning that not only had Ash advanced to the top 16, and Macy and Vincent were eliminated, Ash was the last competitor in the top 16 to win in his group, so that meant that the preliminary rounds were now over, and the top 16, known as the Victory Tournament, could now begin. As Ash and Vincent look at the scores on the screen, Vincent congratulates Ash on the win, and as Ash thanks Vincent for the battle and shakes his hand as the audience cheers on how epic the battle was, including Brock and Misty, as Bulbasaur and Meganium shake vines, indicating that their rivalry was over, and they both respected each other now. Macy then yells out from the crowd at Ash, not sad that she had lost at all, because she was happy that Ash had won, and declared that she would be cheering for Ash to win the entire tournament, believing that he had the strength to do so, and wanting him to, so that Macy could at least say she lost to the winner. Macy then wished Ash good luck, as Ash put up the peace symbol, showing his confidence that he could win. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they had successfully sold more fake badges, and they had earned a lot of goddamn money, especially due to a badge that James had got the idea to create, being a Thunderbolt badge. After seeing Pikachu use its Thunderbolt so many times, he was able to create an accurate Thunderbolt design, and he was able to do it so many times since he had so many goddamn bottle caps. Team Rocket sold so many bottle caps that they were able to make triple their profit just as they planned, and now they planned to quadruple their profit tomorrow from this tripled state already, declaring that they would become rich, as Wobbuffet agreed, popping out of Jesse's Pokeball forcibly. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, they had went back to the Pokemon Center in the Athletes Hall to see the matchups for the top 16. Ash was not shocked at all to see that Harrison had also advanced to the top 16, glad for his new friend, and he also saw that he wouldn't be facing him. Ash was shocked, though, when he saw who he would be facing, as Gary had advanced to the top 16 as well, and, much to Ash's bewilderment, he and Gary were facing each other. Ash was obviously a bit nervous to be facing his childhood rival, but he was confident that he could beat Gary. Gary, on the other hand, was confident that Ash's experience at the Silver Tournament would not extend past this next round, as Gary was obviously planning on beating Ash, making Ash furious as he angrily glared at Gary, leading Gary to smugly glare at him back. Both of these trainers were looking forward to finally having a full-on battle with each other to truly see which one was stronger. And yeah, I'm excited for this battle as well. It's not often that we don't see a full-on rival battle until this late on in the series.